Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Content and Conversations. Today, Ross and I are going to talk through some insights from 4 content marketing tests that we recently ran. The first one, I'm going to tee you up to talk through it, Ross, is basically something that we often recommend to clients and leads is like to get the time to value in content as low as possible. Also having a hero image that is smaller so it can reduce the page load speed. And some of those best practices. So, Ross, what did we find from this data study?
Yeah, so that one in particular was an inference, and it was good to see some data once we pushed it live. Essentially, we'll link to the before and after, and if you're watching on YouTube, you should be able to see it. But to describe it in short, as Drew talked about, we used to have a really big rectangular-ish hero image above the fold. And this looked nice, but it was not necessarily great for seeing content early. And also, as many of us are aware now, Core Web Vitals is a more important recent thing. So that wasn't great for this giant, large, contentful paint loading slowly above the fold. So we rethought that. We have a square, smaller image now. And also introduced, just to kind of give all the details that are new, we did have an author name before. We did not have an author title. So we do have that EAT above the fold now, where you can see someone is a content marketing manager writing about this concept. That might help. And then the final one is just because of that restructuring, we were able to move more content up. So we see more in-body content on load than we did previously. So in looking at those differences, it went live on July 6th, 2023. The big win is that the average time on page went up by 7.62%. Pretty big win. Bounce rate also improved by 1.19%. Not mind-blowing, but it's hard to make those bounce rate changes. So that was still a pretty nice win. And this is correlative. We can't point to this as clearly, but of course, generally most SEOs know you improve your time on page and your bounce rate, search traffic tends to come with. So since that change, we're up around 10% from where we were on a seasonally adjusted basis. So that's all some of the positive wins we've seen from that.
Yeah, and I think it makes sense to me because whenever I land on a piece of content and it's like there's there's nothing there, I'm like, okay, you're gonna make me scroll. Like the scroll fatigue is real, and so I'm glad to see that this finally has some data to back it up when we suggest it in our sales process.
Yeah, and we'll have like a more formal data asset for this that we'll share on social. So look at our social accounts. Maybe not by the time this publishes, but shortly after, we'll share the data more explicitly if you want to leverage this. But you can see our archive.org version of the blog and then our current one to get that before or after. Yeah, it's interesting to see. And to your point, Drew, I think that's a newer thing that's just getting more and more important, is getting competitive to really emphasize is like every pixel needed here. And there's so many historical blogs that just make you scroll a good amount, whether it's calculators or non-calculator experiences. It's important. So we're starting to do more of those instinct things for ourselves. We're, unlike many companies who are actually starting to eat our own dog food, as it were. What is one of those other tests we've seen some positive results from on the content side, Drew?
Yeah, well, we ran a study or a test on the blog where we essentially made our main navigation sticky throughout the content experience. And from this, the data went live. It's increased our goal conversion 39%. Although I should put a caveat in there that what a goal means to us is probably slightly different from many other companies. For us, it's if somebody went from our content and navigated to our services pages, our case study pages, or our business form to contact us. And so you can think if you're in SaaS or maybe e-commerce, could be going to a product page, could be going to book a demo for SaaS. Those are kind of like keeping that sticky navigation and having that constant reminder of what the call to action is throughout content is important. And it's also led to, 12% increase in sessions. So, navigation between pages on the site and also an increase in the average session. So I think to your point from earlier, like having that pixel perfect like experience throughout is important. And for me personally, like if I'm reading a post, maybe it's on my phone. This, I should mention, this was on mobile and desktop. And like I'm, all the way to the bottom. And I'm like, maybe there's a section that's like, oh, we do this. Like, this is what our product does. And I'm like, oh, great. I'd love to sign up. And then I have to scroll all the way back up. Give my finger a break, man. Just make it a sticky nav.
I think the takeaway is we have really lazy hands, Drew. Like we just we don't want to scroll.
That's it.
We just do not want to do that. Yeah. So this case study, I don't think was anything mind blowing or anything, but it's good confirmation of what is a best practice. So see the data, and hopefully it can support prioritization of this kind of project, depending on your industry. In our industry, we do have those long sales cycles. So reporting on visits to those pages does seem worthwhile, but the overall increase is a clear positive. On the content section in particular, where everything's so long form, you want to get people proximity to a conversion. It just seems like a good overall idea. So that is a publicly available data set. And one final note on just some of this data we're referencing, GA4 wizards, if they do exist yet, might notice we're referencing historical GA data. That's essentially the timeframes we have. So we are referencing that, not GA4 in this case, but still accurate. We're still collecting up to relevant timeframes.
Yeah, it's good to know. And so another A/B test we've actually run on the client side. I think we're going to keep that anonymized, but if you want to, Ross, give some insights into what we did with this client and some of the results, that'd be great.
Yeah, I don't want to speak for them to say we ran this test. We did have the idea for it, actually in the positive direction, and they executed on their side. So I want to be a little muddy on what the exact insights were. And I think there's some different elements here that are interesting. But essentially what we argued for is that you should increase your font size on your content section. You'd think hypothetically, generally make your font larger if it was on the edge would help metrics on average. And kind of an interesting insight from having tested this is they actually saw their conversion rate drop slightly. And the other metrics were not so significantly positive that it warranted that offset of the drop. So in seeing that test realized, and I still want to dig into it and see some of it to kind of like know that it's still not worth rolling out, honestly. But you can think through why that might be the case. Like if you're on a landing page, it's like a PPC type experience. The more you detract from a conversion action or like the buttons or the call action areas, the more you can technically hurt conversion. And that's true of font size. So like if you actually made this a better experience, hypothetically, that might detract from conversion a little. So it was kind of a tough two-sided coin. I would want to like really dig into the data. And that's something we still are arguing for. I think sometimes you have to make qualitative calls on things. They weren't so small that it was a terrible experience. So that's worth noting. They were around 16 pixels, maybe 15.
Where did we go?
We wanted to get, I think the test was 18 pixels or so. So not mind-blowing either direction, but it's one of those things where sometimes if it's just on the edge, maybe it's slightly decreased conversion, and you just know it. It seems like this is one of those things that you just know is the right thing. I would argue for it. But there's some other dynamics here. It's a huge brand. They might maintain trust despite that readability. Like if you're joeschmo.com, you probably can't get away with a poor content experience. Well, if you're joebiden.com, you might be able to do that a little bit better because people know of you anyway. So that's the theory.
Just to confirm, Joe Biden is not a client of ours. I just want to make that clear. But it's interesting to note that, or maybe it's worth pulling a thread here. I wonder if there's any demographic data that would like confirm or refute that hypothesis. Like if it's an older audience, maybe the larger font would have increased conversion. So it could be something that people out there listening may have that in mind. Like if your audience skews older, it probably makes sense to go 18 pixels minimum. What do you think, Ross?
Yeah, that's a great call out. It's worth noting without sharing the client, they're a tech centric vertical, probably
Younger
skews a
audience,
little
probably.
younger.
Yeah.
It's not super young. I mean, their buyer is a senior buyer. So maybe I'm that buyer persona. There's just a good insight that I'm getting old, maybe.
How's your vision these days, Ross?
I got LASIK. I think I can see the data on this, but I
Nice.
don't know. Maybe that's the real takeaway is I need to get my vision checked. For this. But you're working on transitioning from that interesting outcome. So just to clarify, end the thread there, we're still recommending people increase their font size, but it might just be a little more intricate than we had previously imagined, which is good to know. You can't just blindly roll this out and not consider all those elements. But Drew, you're running a very interesting test using our new keyword research process, looking at some unique things there. Could you talk through that and share one of the data points we found particularly of interest to share?
Yeah, this one is obviously interesting to me because I helped build this tool that essentially goes out for every keyword and it pulls in the top 10 posts. And if there's a date within the meta description, it analyzes that date compared to today and gets like an average last updated date time frame. And so we pulled 1,000 of the top ranking or the most searched keywords from Ahrefs for best software match phrases. And so there's 1,000 keywords there, and we're doing it for other variants like what is and how to. But for this initial like discussion, we're going to keep it to the best software. And what we found is that the average last updated date for that is 197 days. And so that is really interesting because that means you basically need to update this a post that has that every 6 months, if not more regularly. Ross, do you have any initial thoughts from that average?
Yeah, I would agree with that. Essentially, one of the insights of this great tool that you're building is how often should we be updating content? Our theory is if you're in that average range that's safe, you'll hopefully remove some randomness because there's only sometimes 5 dates on the search results. And if you stay competitive, you're ideally in the top 75 percentile or two, you'll rank better on average. And one of the insights we saw was one of the most common reasons we weren't ranking well for content we created that was otherwise high quality was just it was not updated frequently enough. So this is a vertical that we saw hype more frequency on average. So we thought it was worth pulling best X software as phrase match. Yeah, it was super interesting to see that average. So I would think the more competitive it is, the more frequent you're probably going to need to. We'll have to flesh that out with data eventually. But the less competitive, I would guess, the more you can get away with maybe once a year.
Yep.
But
So
yeah,
just give you
some of what I thought.
some anecdotal data to back up what you just said. Best accounting software and best VPN software are like 8 days on average and 3 days on average, respectively, based on the SERP within the last week, because that's when the data was collected. So that's worth noting. It could change.
Yeah. What about that other inside of the tool, Drew? Is like not just how often things are updated, but what showing dates or not means, and what was the characteristics of this search result?
Yeah, the tool will typically surface when the keyword doesn't have dates included. So that could be landing pages or ranking or other types of content that doesn't usually have a date associated with it, or Google's just not showing the date. And that basically 97.7% of the time, the dates are being shown, which to me indicates that, and something we argue for often, is that best software terms should be blog post roundup type content because that's what Google's surfacing. And I think this data backs that up.
Yeah, agreed. And that was a super kind of like tangential. We didn't go down that route when we built this tool, but it solves for another issue. Is sometimes you could create blog type experiences when you shouldn't have a blog type experience, such as a e-commerce category page or something like that. If the search result is not showing that very clearly, you shouldn't do that. That might be a reason you're not ranking. And yeah, it's increasingly the case, it seems like, and we can monitor this over time. In these type of terms, it's a blog type experience. You're not ranking much for feature pages or landing pages traditionally with this kind of experience. It's pretty rare. So it's good to see the data supporting that.
Yeah, and just to give some quick macro data on this analysis, for this keyword match phrase, we had 982 keywords, and they were cumulative of 462,950 searches per month. So a good sample size, I would say, of like being confident that these are, every 6 months, if you have a piece of content in the best software realm, you should be updating it.
Nice. Yeah. Hopefully everyone found this collection of data interesting. Please let us know if you want to hear more of these. But yeah, we're working on that data study. Drew shared that last data point of. So expect more of that in the future. And hopefully we'll keep learning from these tests. And not true tests, but of course, what the data is showing, especially we didn't do a true A/B test for our site, but still interesting outcomes, and hopefully a few of them are useful for you and your businesses.